Hey guys, it's Kevin again, my review for Eternals. And this film, we basically do follow on, well, the Eternals. They are this group basically created by Celestials that were instructed to come to Earth to basically fight these creatures known as the Deviants. They are pretty much what they sound like. They are these world-ending sort of creatures that were destroying Earth, and it seems like they have been successful. They completed their mission. They all pretty much go their separate ways and remain on Earth, basically, wait for further orders. And basically, years later in 2021, Deviants suddenly return, and the Eternals now have to regroup after not seeing each other for millenniums and basically try to take them down once and for all. So Eternals overall, I was really looking forward to this film. In fact, out of all the Marvel movies that were coming out in the beginning of this year, this is the one that I was the most pumped for. I kept saying to everyone, wait for Eternals. Eternals is going to be something game-changing. Like, having Chloé Zhao on board, Kevin Feige hyping up her as a director, me not really knowing a lot about the Eternals, this just seemed like one of the most intriguing films that Marvel has ever put out. There was the cast was just absolutely incredible in terms of talent, just so ridiculously stacked, and I really was just so hyped to see how this film was going to turn out. The cinema, the look and feel of it all, it just looked otherworldly, and it really did seem like the kind of movie that Marvel really does need at this point. I've talked about how they're very much in like a test phase where they are trying to get people back on board. A lot of people have kind of checked out after Endgame, and now what they're trying to do is release different types of content, release different types of films, surrounding different characters to really get people excited about Marvel again. It seemed like Eternals was going to be the film to do that, and it's come out, and it very much disappointed me. Now, look, I don't hate this movie in any way. I don't even think this is, like, the worst Marvel movie. But considering the type of film that this is, the epic scale of it all, how dense it is, it honestly is really disappointing just how much this did let me down. Eternals, I really do think, is one of the biggest missed opportunities within the entire MCU. That really could have been a great film had it done a lot of things differently. And I think what should be this like really epic and amazing introduction to one of the most powerful groups we've ever seen from the MCU is instead this like very overly convoluted and frankly overbloated and surprisingly very dull mess that just never really clicked for me in the way that it should. But we are just getting into right now, starting off with the cast here. Which, again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I probably sound like a broken record at this point. Marvel is always amazing in terms of casting. Like, most of the time, their casting is aces. They always really do succeed in getting the best possible talent to fulfill these roles. And I think this film is no different. I think all of the acting is really strong here. I think everyone gives some really memorable performances. Let's first talk about Gemma Chan, which, yeah, it is kind of weird to see this character considering that Gemma Chan has already played a character within the MCU, but she gives a really strong performance here. I think Gemma Chan shows that she can lead a movie very well. I've always been a big fan of hers, and I think this film really does give her that time to shine quite nicely. Cersei is a very likable lead, someone that you do very much latch onto in that way, and I think overall Chan definitely does give a very emotionally satisfying performance here. This is really the character that everyone believes in, everyone feels is tasked to lead, is tasked to stop the deviants and everything, and you can really see how that does start to get to her, and Chan definitely does portray that very well here. I really did enjoy her performance throughout this entire film, and I think she carries it very nicely. Richard Madden is also very good here as the character of Icarus. This is a very complex character. There's a lot going on with him. Everyone sees him as like the hero. He's the leader of the Eternals. He's the one that's kind of tasked to like help everyone. And you can see that that really is starting to get to him. And I think Madden portrays that very well here. I really enjoyed his performance throughout this film. I think he definitely has some really strong moments here. You know, Kumail Nanjiani is really great here as Kingo. As Kingo, I really enjoyed his performance. He honestly provides some really nice comedic relief to this film. I'll talk about the humor in a little bit, but I think he definitely was a big standout in terms of that. I very much enjoyed his character here. A big standout for me, I have to say, was actually Leah McHugh as Sprite. I was not expecting to like her performance as much as I did, but I think she really did kill it here. Sprite is probably one of the more complex characters in this. She is someone that is, you know, ostensibly a child, but obviously she has the mind of an adult, and you can see the effect that that's had on her, and I think McHugh portrays that character quite nicely. You know, I really love Brian Tyree Henry here. I think he gives a really strong performance. Barry Keoghan's great here, but I have to say, maybe the strongest performance of them all was actually from Angelina Jolie, who plays the character of Athena. She, I think, easily had the most to work with here. Athena as a character is probably the most intriguing of the Eternals as well. Like, if I had to pick a favorite Eternal, it probably would be her. The way that she is more connected to everything, and also sort of, you know, pulled in through the deviants and what's really going on there. I thought she just did such an amazing job with. Jolie really, you know, really sinks her teeth into this role, and I really love what she ended up doing as the character of Athena. There's a lot that this character has to deal with, and I think she absolutely killed it here. She, for me, I think really was the big standout throughout this entire film, but everyone, I think, does a really great job. Harish Patel is really fun here as Kingo's assistant. I thought he was definitely a fun character to watch. Salma Hayek is good for what she has. Not in this movie a lot, but for what she has, she definitely does do a pretty solid job. Even Kid Harington, I enjoyed quite a bit. I thought he was actually a lot of fun. He's not in the movie a ton, but when he's here, I think he was definitely a lot of fun to watch. Overall, I mean, you've heard how diverse this cast is, and yeah, they definitely do deliver. I think everyone does work quite well together. I really did enjoy most of, you know, I really did enjoy all of the performances throughout this film, and while I do have a lot of issues with this movie, the performances are very much not one of them. I think overall this cast is a very strong one, and I think they deserve a much better movie than what they're really saddled with here. All right, well, now we have to get into the things that unfortunately do very much bring this movie down, which let's get into the directing here by Chloé Zhao, which I was just so hyped for, especially coming off the heels of her Oscar win in Nomadland. You know, this really seemed like this was going to be like a different type of movie for her. This was going to be something that was very challenging, something that she hasn't really taken on before. And the thing with Chloé Zhao as a director is that she is a very minimalistic director. What I mean by that is that she doesn't try to do a lot in her movies. She does a lot, but in a very, like, authentic way, you know? Her films are very lifelike. They have this very, like I said, sort of subdued quality to them, and taking on something that's a lot more bombastic and a lot more dense, such as Eternals, I think was a really ambitious choice. And I think Zhao definitely does have the passion for this film, but I gotta be honest, I didn't really feel her her normal directorial flair in this movie. I felt like it was very much missing here. I've heard a lot of people say this film feels very different from other MCU films, and at points, yes, it does. It definitely does have a different feel, but I also feel like it's kind of more of the same. This is really the first Marvel movie where it feels like Zhao is kind of held back by the fact that this is a Marvel film, so she can't really do what she wants to do with the Eternals as a director, and that was just a bit disappointing to me. I think when this movie, has its own distinctive tone, it works pretty well, but a lot of the time, it does just kind of feel like another Marvel movie in that way, in terms of the tone. There really isn't a lot that's different here. It's darker than most, for sure, but there's still, that normal humor that's in here. There's still, a lot of, Marvel type, a lot of Marvel type moments, and I just think overall Chloe Zhao's directing was just a little bit disappointing here. I wasn't overly impressed by what she did, and I don't know if she's to blame, if she just again was overwhelmed by what was going on and she just couldn't quite construct this story in the way that she wanted to, or if she was just held back because of the confines of Marvel. I really don't know which it is, but unfortunately, I just don't think her vision, was fully executed in this film. It did not come through in the way I think that everyone was hoping for. So very, very disappointed, especially with how much Kevin Feige's been hyping her up. I really expected a lot more here, and I was very let down by her directing. But what really holds this film back for me is the screenplay. As a whole, I really just don't think the screenplay is that great. There's a lot that Eternals wants to do, but there also is so much that it needs to introduce. Not only are we focusing on 10 completely new characters that we've never seen before, but we got to establish this whole other world. We have to really flesh out, who the Deviants are. We need to understand the purpose of the Eternals. We need to understand what makes all of them, what makes all of them purposeful. Why are they still here? What's really going on? Who are the Celestials? Why did they design all this stuff? There's so many questions that we have involving these characters, and the problem is because this is only a film and we can only do so much, the film spends a considerable amount of time, really just kind of like spouting out everything that's gone on with the Eternals. It starts off with like this like scroll of sorts, and I thought I was watching like a Star Wars movie. It just felt very off in that way, and I think that really is the biggest problem when it comes to the screenplay. This is just a very, very messily handled film, and I understand that there's a lot that we need to establish, but I almost feel like this is just a little too ambitious here. And what it really comes down to for me is that at the end of the day, I just don't think that this should have been a movie. You know what I think it should have been? A Disney Plus series. And to me, this is like, you have the Disney Plus property. You know that, you're making all these different shows. You're trying to expound, you're trying to extrapolate on things that you've introduced with characters in other films. And you are trying to really like expand upon it in the best way that you possibly can. And to me, this seems like one of the most blatant examples of this should probably be a TV show, because there is so much that we are establishing here. There is so much that this film is trying to introduce in terms of character, in terms of setting, and unfortunately, none of it just feels earned overall. I was honestly very, just overwhelmed, and not in a good way, by everything that was happening. The film will often cut back and forth between the present day, when we are seeing these characters and them sort of like, going through life. They've been on Earth forever and they're just kind of like going through their lives in a mundane way, and then they're called back in to, help out, to finally go after the Deviants because they've returned, and all the way back to like prehistoric times when they first existed and they first started off their mission and things like that. And it just does not blend in the way I think it needed to. I think what we really needed to do here, if we were given a TV show, is that the cutting back and forth, would flow a lot better, because here, the way that it's structured, it just feels very choppily handled, especially because there are many key moments that happen within the present day, and we are clearly supposed to feel something from them. But the problem is they establish these moments without us knowing barely anything about these characters. There's one thing they do with a character, especially in like the first 40 minutes, and I was like, are you serious right now? Like, there's no way this is actually happening, because we knew so little about that character. There was no possible way that I was going to care. There was no possible way that I was going to feel any sort of emotional attachment to that character, because I just didn't know anything about them at that point. And this applies to many of the characters in this movie. To be honest with you, a lot of people have been talking about who's the best Eternal and things like that. It's very hard for me to say which characters that I really did latch onto, because I feel like the majority of them just didn't really get enough enough to do. I think there's some characters with some really strong ideas, but as a whole, I just don't think their arcs were fully fleshed out in the way that they needed to. For example, you have a character like Sprite, and Sprite is a very complex character because, as I said, this is someone that is seemingly a kid. Everyone treats her like she's a kid, but she's not a kid. She's an adult. She has an adult mindset. There are things that she wants to do that she's not able to do. There are so many things that she's limited to as a character, and you can see that this is something that has really bothered her. But the problem is we get such a surface level explanation of it. There's so little we're able to dive into, and I feel like that's a character where if we were given a full TV series, we would actually really connect to Sprite as a character. Sprite would probably be one of the best characters in the show if they were able to dive into her more. Or say the character of Fastos, Brian Tyree Henry. This is a guy who has all of this access to weapons and technology and things like that, but he's not entirely sure if he's using it for the right reasons, and because of certain, encounters that he's had, he doesn't really have a lot of faith in humanity. But again, but of course we're also dealing with the fact that he is, openly gay, and this is something that he has, really come to terms with, and he has this really sort of quiet life with his family and things like that, and he's kind of like gotten away from everything. And again, there's just not enough time to establish that. We don't know enough about this character, and that applies to so many different characters in this movie. There really are only a few characters here that I can say I felt fully attached to. The only real character in this film that I felt fully attached to all the way through actually was Thena. I talked about before, I think Angelina Jolie gives the best performance, and I think it's because Thena as a character feels the most well developed. This is someone that is this warrior of sorts. She has this ability to where she can form pretty much any weapon out of cosmic energy, and you see how this really becomes compromised when she starts to sort of become connected to the deviants, and the deviants start to sort of emotionally torture her. And it's a really well done arc. You understand her character, you get what she's going through, you understand how complicated this is for her, you understand why she wants to go after the deviants so bad. She also develops this really close bond with the character of Gilgamesh, and you really feel attached to their friendship overall. She just overall feels like the most developed character. If I had to point to a character that probably should have been the lead of this movie, it's Thena, and I don't really understand why they didn't focus on her, because she's easily the most interesting out of everyone. Instead, who we're focusing on this movie is probably one of the worst leads they could have chosen, where, like I said, Gemma Chan's performance is really good, but Cersei as a character, I hate to say it, but she very much is that type of Mary Sue character that a lot of people like to clown on, and I don't like to use that term because I think it's a very insulting term to to any sort of female characters, and it just isn't really great to associate people with. But I think overall that is how I would classify her in this movie. There really is no flaws to this character whatsoever. She really is just the chosen one. Everyone believes in her. Everyone thinks she's going to do great things. She's going to stop this alien race. She's going to, save the world once and for all. And that's kind of it. There isn't really an arc that she overcomes. There's no real struggle that she has here. You really are just kind of wondering, why is she the main character? And I just don't really understand why they decided to focus so much of this movie on her, because she just isn't that particularly interesting. And I think that the film would have been a lot better if we focused on literally anyone else, but Thena as a character just isn't very interesting to watch. And the same goes for the character of Icarus, who, again, I enjoyed Richard Madden in this role, but there's so much that happens with Icarus as a character that just doesn't make sense narratively. And it's, again, because of the fact that we just do not have time to fully establish it. There's just a lot of things that I just didn't fully understand here. When characters are mad at each other, especially, I was like, why are they mad? Like, what happened here? There's a lot of things that I felt just weren't that clear to me, and I think if we had an episode of television to really flesh out these characters, it would just be a lot more effective. But unfortunately, that's just not the case, and we're stuck with this movie that is just very overly convoluted. The mission that they're on is supposed to be like this world-ending one, full of like these crazy stakes, and you just don't feel any of it because you just aren't that attached to any of what's going on. So you don't really care if they're able to pull this off. You don't really care if they're able to save the world because you just don't know enough about these characters, and I think that's what really does hold the movie back. And the fact that we have 10 characters and there's very little I can tell you about some of them, I mean, that really just tells you how poorly written this movie is, and that's what was so shocking to me, because Marvel's usually really good at this. They've shown before in like films like Infinity War, for example, that they know how to balance characters, but I think the difference with that is that the majority of those characters were established. The only character they really needed to establish was Thanos. The difference is here, we don't really know any of these characters, and by the end of the movie, I still didn't feel like I knew enough about them. So yeah, I mean, I think that really is the biggest issue when it comes to this film. The screenplay is just so choppily handled and just really took me out of the movie very often. You know, whether it's the lack of character development or just the constant expository dialogue, which is really just nonstop in this film, or the endless flashbacks, which eventually do stop, but for a while it's like we're cutting from, like, we get 40 minutes of flashbacks, and then we get 40 minutes of present day, and then we get another like 40 minutes of flashbacks, and it's just too much. There just needed to be a much better balance here, and it just wasn't achieved, and again, it was just very disappointing overall. And as I said, I understand that we're trying to focus on a new group. We've never seen these characters before. Obviously, there's a lot of ground they need to cover, but there's gotta be a way to do it in a more organic and nuanced manner than just the clunkiness that we get here. This film is told in such a haphazard manner. We're constantly just jumping through a ton of stuff, and I just don't think they did a really great job here at all. There's so many ideas that this film wants to go for, and very little of them I think they execute in a satisfying manner, and that was just really unfortunate, because I really do love a lot of what this movie is trying to do. I should love this movie. I like how ambitious it is. I like how innovative it's trying to be. But I just don't think, because of the fact that it laid that groundwork, it's quite as innovative as it wanted to be. It has that ambition for sure, but I think it needed to do a lot more in order to fully win me over, which it sadly just didn't. And because of how poorly they develop a lot of these characters, you know, when we get to the latter half of the film, and there are all of these decisions that these characters make, they all feel like they're coming out of left field. None of them feel like this is earned. None of them feel like this is where this character should logically be. A lot of the decisions I just was really questioning, and I was like, why are we doing this? Why are we going in this direction now? It just didn't really make sense to me logically. And again, I think this really could have been fixed if they just gave a lot more time for these characters to really to really let the story and characters breathe, but we're just never really given that time overall. I think the other thing that really hurts Eternals, though, is that theme-wise, I mean, this is much deeper than a lot of what we've explored in other films. Like, you have characters here that are really questioning their humanity. Do they have humanity? Is this something that's supposed to be given to them? You know, because they're not human, and they're sort of questioning, like, is that their purpose? Is that something that they should worry about? You know, there's been other disasters in the world that they weren't present for, and you can see the regrets there. And again, a lot of these themes just don't feel all that well fleshed out. They're great ideas, but they're just not fully fleshed out in the way that they needed to. And again, that's something that really did let me down in this film. I think just overall, the writing just isn't that tight here, and that's very disappointing. But the other thing that also shocked me is the humor in this movie is really not that great at all. I talked about how Kumail Nanjiani made me laugh, but aside from him, and I really think he only made me laugh because of his comedic delivery, but like the jokes themselves, I just didn't find to be very funny here at all. A lot of them are very repetitive. There's this character that Kingo brings along for the ride, played by Harish Patel. His entire joke is just he always has a camera. He always has a camera. He's always ready to film them with what's going on, because Kumail Nanjiani is like making this like documentary of sorts, and Harish Patel just always has a camera ready to go at any point, and it just got got so tiring after a while, and anytime the film tried to provide some kind of levity, it just felt forced to me. It felt like something that they had to do because it's a Marvel movie and we need humor, and it just didn't really work at all. Also, the connections to the Marvel Cinematic Universe feel so clumsily handled. Every single tie-in that they make, I just didn't buy into it. I didn't buy that these guys are in the same universe as like the Avengers. It just didn't fully work for me. I understand that we are trying to expand the universe and we are trying to show, new sides and things that we haven't, new worlds and things that we haven't seen before. But with the way this film is handled, I just don't think they established that all that well. They didn't establish a lot of things that well, as I said. So yeah, just the screenplay over here, it's really not that great. It definitely leaves a lot to be desired, and it definitely, I think, is the thing that really does bring down this film overall. When it comes to the cinematography here, this is something that the MCU really does usually excel at, and I will say, visual-wise, this film is definitely really gorgeous to look at. I think the look and feel of everything is definitely really great, especially the look of the Eternals themselves when they're in, like, 5000 BC. There's a lot of stunning visual moments for sure that you really can't take your eyes off of. I think scenery-wise, all of that is really great. In terms of action sequences, I'll be honest, I just don't remember a lot of them. I didn't think they were badly handled or anything, but I felt they were largely disposable, and again, I think it's because they just don't feel all that earned. There's nothing that memorable going on in terms of action sequences here, and I just felt they left a lot to be desired, so I just wasn't super into a lot going on there. But I do think cinematography-wise and costume-wise as well, the film definitely does deliver on that front. I think they did a really good job with that. Also, the score here from Ramin Djawadi I thought was also very strong. It definitely gives you that sort of like epic feel that you wanted for this movie, and I think he does a really strong job with that. And the editing, like I said, while this film is 157 minutes, I honestly think it's too short. I think this movie needed a lot more time to fully establish these characters, fully establish this world, really just showcase the density of it all. Unfortunately, they just weren't given the proper time to do that, and I think that really does hurt this movie severely. Eternals has a lot of really great ideas. Eternals is a film that is very ambitious, and I really do applaud it for that. I like the fact this film is trying to do something different. I will always applaud a film for doing something different rather than just being more of the same. But with the way this film is handled and how choppily edited it is and the constant back and forth with just the flashbacks and the present day, but also just how little of a job, how little it does in terms of establishing these characters, establishing this world overall, and how it really just doesn't explore it to the depths that it needs to. At the end of the day, I just think this is such a disappointing film that could have been so much more. There's so many ideas that this film wants to tackle that I think could have been so strong, but at the end of the day, I really do feel this is probably one of the least relevant Marvel films we have really ever gotten. I don't really see how these characters are going to fit into the grander universe. I don't really see where we're heading moving forward when it comes to this story. They do leave things on a cliffhanger, but I don't really know what they're trying to do there or where this is really going to go. I don't even know if we're going to get that sequel. So overall, I just really wanted a lot more when it came to Eternals. It's not a terrible movie. It's got some really strong performances. It does have some really good ideas, but it's completely undermined by such a poorly thought out script that I think needed so much more development. Some characters that just I really had a hard time latching onto. Surprisingly very dull dialogue as well, and very sluggish pacing that really just bring the entire movie down, and a very overbloated runtime that really just makes Eternals from a film that could have been one of the most ambitious and one of the most, I think, impressive of the MCU, a film that really kind of puts the MCU in an exciting and new direction, and really just feels like something that we just didn't really need. It feels like the kind of lesser Marvel film that we just didn't really need at the end of the day, that just didn't really make much of an impact at all. This is easily one of the most disappointing films of the entire year for me, and I am going to give Eternals overall a C. Like I said, I appreciate the diverse cast. I love a lot of the performances here. I think there's some really strong ideas, but considering that this was like supposed to be the film that was going to like reshape the MCU as a whole, I really was just expecting a lot more from this, and it really did let me down. But other than that, guys, so my review of Eternals. Let me know if you guys saw this overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.